I funded my father-in-law's retirement party while his kids contributed nothing. Then he cut me from the guest list. I always knew I was the outsider in Harold's family. From the moment I married Aaron 8 years ago, there was an invisible line drawn between the Lockwoods and me. They were old money in our town, not wealthy enough to be in magazines, but established enough that everyone knew their name. Harold Lockwood had built his manufacturing company from scratch in the late 70s, turning a small operation into a regional powerhouse that employed over 100 people at its peak. But that peak had long passed by the time I entered the picture. The first time Aaron took me to the sprawling Lockwood family home for Sunday dinner, I noticed the subtle signs of financial strain beneath the polished veneer, the delayed maintenance on the property, the slightly outdated luxury cars, the tense discussions that would halt whenever I entered a room. My background in finance made it impossible to miss the indicators. I came from a practical family where money was discussed openly, not hidden behind crystal decanters of scotch and forced smiles. When Aaron and I married, I was already established in my career as a senior financial analyst with a specialty in corporate restructuring. I'd saved diligently, living well below my means while my peers splurged on downtown apartments and European vacations. The business is struggling, but we'll figure it out, Aaron would say dismissively whenever I asked about Lockwood Manufacturing. Dad's retiring next year anyway. It's just a rough patch. What my husband didn't say, what none of them acknowledged, was that the company was one bad quarter away from bankruptcy. Harold had refinanced multiple times, leveraging everything to keep afloat during industry changes he hadn't adapted to quickly enough. His children, all nominally involved in the business, but effectively collecting paychecks for minimal work, seemed content to let it fail. After all, they'd each built separate lives with the advantages the Lockwood name had given them. The announcement of Harold's retirement came over Sunday dinner at their home during a particularly chilly January evening. Diane, my mother-in-law, had prepared her usual elaborate meal, a show of abundance that belied their financial reality. 42 years, Harold said, swirling his scotch as he made the announcement. His face, lined with years of stress and decision-making, carried both pride and resignation. That's enough for any man. Time to enjoy what's left with Diane, maybe travel a bit. I watched the reactions around the table. Aaron nodded absently, already checking something on his phone. Jennifer, his older sister, immediately began talking logistics. Dad, we should discuss transition plans for the company. The market's not great right now. Maybe it's time to consider options. Their brother Michael, the youngest at 36 and the only one who had attempted to create something separate from the family business, a string of failed restaurants, nodded sagely. Maybe we should just liquidate. Use the proceeds for your retirement. The manufacturing sector isn't what it used to be. I watched Harold's face fall slightly before he caught himself. No one mentioned a celebration, a commemoration, any acknowledgement of those 42 years building something from nothing. Just cold business talk about the most cost-effective way to dismantle his life's work. Later that night, after Aaron had fallen asleep, I found myself unable to rest. I slipped downstairs and saw light coming from Harold's study. I knocked softly on the half-open door. "Come in," he called, voice rough with fatigue or emotion, perhaps both. The study was a time capsule of Lockwood Manufacturing's history. Photographs chronicled the evolution from a small workshop to the current facility. Awards and newspaper clippings from better days lined the walls. Harold sat behind his desk, papers spread before him, looking every bit the captain of a sinking ship. "I'd like to help," I said simply, taking the seat across from him. Harold looked up, confusion evident in his bloodshot eyes. "With what, Rachel?" "With saving the business. And with giving you the retirement party you deserve." He laughed, not unkindly, but with genuine surprise. "You're an accountant at a small firm. How exactly would you help?" "I'm a financial restructuring specialist at one of the top consulting firms in the state," I corrected gently. "And I understand business turnarounds better than you think. I've led 3 successful restructuring projects for companies larger than Lockwood." Harold's eyebrows raised slightly. I had never mentioned my professional accomplishments at family gatherings. No one had ever asked. "And I have savings," I continued. Quite substantial savings, actually. From before I married Aaron. Money I've kept separate. Harold studied me with new interest, setting down the papers he'd been reviewing. Why would you do that? This isn't your burden to carry. I considered my answer carefully. Because you built something that matters to this community. Because 200 people still depend on Lockwood Manufacturing for their livelihoods. And because no one else is offering to help. There was another reason one I kept to myself. I'd always wanted to run a company like Lockwood. To take something with good bones and transform it. My career had involved advising others on how to save their businesses, but never having the authority to implement my own vision. Aaron doesn't know about your resources? Harold asked shrewdly. We've kept our finances mostly separate since marriage, I said. His idea, not mine. I didn't mention the prenuptial agreement Aaron had insisted upon, worried my family might try to claim Lockwood assets someday, an irony that wasn't lost on me now. 2 days later, in a quiet coffee shop across town where no one would recognize us, I signed papers that injected capital into Lockwood Manufacturing through a shell company I had quickly established. Harold signed too, giving me 52% ownership, though my name appeared nowhere in the public-facing documents. He believed it was mainly a loan with some consulting thrown in, a lifeline from a generous daughter-in-law. I knew better. It was an investment in my future, a calculated risk that would either cement my place in the family or give me something far more valuable: independence. Over the next 6 months, Lockwood Manufacturing underwent a transformation that those in the industry called remarkable. From the outside, it appeared that Harold had experienced a last-minute burst of business acumen, restructuring debt, securing new clients in emerging sectors, modernizing operations with targeted technology investments, and streamlining the workforce without the massive layoffs everyone had expected. The truth was far different. Every decision, every pivot, every negotiation had my fingerprints all over it, though no one knew. I orchestrated late-night strategy sessions with Harold disguised as casual dinners while Aaron worked late. I drafted proposals that Harold presented as his own to the board. I negotiated with suppliers using my industry contacts, all through Harold's email account or on his behalf. As the company stabilized and then began to grow again, Aaron, Jennifer, and Michael suddenly took renewed interest in the family business. They began showing up at company functions, speaking confidently about our legacy and our strategy moving forward. Dad's always been a genius with timing, Jennifer announced at the Christmas dinner 7 months after my secret investment. She raised her glass in a toast, her voice carrying the practiced warmth she used at charity galas. The business is doing better than ever. Who would have thought a year ago we'd be expanding into the medical component sector? I had thought it. In fact, I had orchestrated the entire expansion, including securing the FDA certifications necessary for medical device components. But I simply smiled and raised my glass with everyone else. Harold caught my eye briefly across the table, a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, crossing his face before he looked away. Our arrangement had proven far more successful than either of us had anticipated. The company was not merely surviving, it was thriving. And with success came complications. As profits increased, so did the family's indifference toward me. They'd never been particularly warm, but now there was an active exclusion happening. When I offered thoughts at dinner about economic trends or industry developments, conversations would pause awkwardly before someone changed the subject. I was no longer even invited to some family gatherings, with Aaron explaining afterward they were just boring business discussions or family traditions you wouldn't understand. Aaron began attending what he called family strategy meetings about the business without telling me until he was heading out the door or already gone. It's just boring stuff, he'd say when I asked about these increasingly frequent meetings. No need for you to waste your evening hearing Michael and Jennifer argue about supplier contracts. One night, after he returned from such a meeting smelling of expensive whiskey, I asked directly, "Do they ever ask about my input? Given my background in finance and corporate restructuring?" Aaron laughed, loosening his tie as he poured himself another drink. "Honey, we're talking about real business decisions. The kind that affect millions in revenue." He kissed my forehead condescendingly. "Besides, "You're so busy with your little accounting job." I smiled tightly. My little accounting job was now a carefully maintained cover I'd reduced to part-time hours months ago, using the rest of my time to strategize for Lockwood Manufacturing. The medical components division that everyone was so proud of had been my concept from initial research to implementation. I'd identified the opportunity, vetted the potential clients, and structured the financing. But I said nothing. I simply nodded and asked if he wanted dinner, playing the role they all expected of me. Inside, though, something was shifting. A gradual realization that my investment hadn't bought me the respect I'd hoped for. If anything, it had made me more invisible as the family reasserted their perceived birthright to the company's success. As Harold's official retirement date approached, talk turned to his send-off celebration. The business was now on solid ground, with the medical components division generating significant new revenue and old clients returning as word spread of Lockwood's renaissance. "We should do something small," Michael suggested during a family dinner in early spring. He'd recently appointed himself as the company's Director of Business Development, a position that seemed to primarily involve long lunches with potential clients. Maybe the country club dining room? Times are still tight. They were not tight. The company was now more profitable than it had been in 15 years, but none of Harold's children were willing to spend on what they considered frivolous, unless it directly benefited their own lifestyles. "Actually," I ventured, setting down my fork deliberately, "Harold deserves something special after 4 decades of building this company. Maybe the Hartwick Hotel ballroom? They have that beautiful space overlooking the river." Jennifer's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose as she exchanged glances with Diane. "And who's paying for special? We all have our own expenses. My boy's private school tuition just went up again." "I'm sure it'll work out," I said mildly, taking a sip of wine. The next day, I contacted the event planner myself. Under the guise of coordinating for the family, I secured the grand ballroom at the Hartwick Hotel, the most prestigious venue in town. I arranged for top-tier catering, hired Harold's favorite jazz quartet that he always mentioned when the rare live music discussion came up, and commissioned custom decorations chronicling his business journey from startup to industry leader. I spent hours compiling photographs, newspaper clippings, and company milestones for a visual retrospective to be displayed around the ballroom. I arranged for former employees from early days to attend as surprise guests. I even tracked down the banker who had given Harold his first business loan in 1981, now retired in Arizona, and flew him in for the event. When the $30,000 bill came due, I paid it without hesitation from my separate account. The amount didn't include the additional $5,000 for the custom-engraved watch I'd ordered as Harold's retirement gift, a proper token of appreciation for decades of work. Aaron noticed nothing unusual about my activities. His contributions to our joint account had dwindled over the past year as he'd begun keeping more personal funds separate, something I'd noticed but never mentioned. His recent purchase of a new sports car, ostensibly to impress clients, made it clear where his priorities lay. 2 days before the event, I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Jennifer and my mother-in-law Diane entered the adjacent dining room, not realizing I was within earshot. "Can't believe he insisted she be removed from the list," Jennifer was saying, her voice low but perfectly audible in the open concept space. "Well, Harold has his reasons," Diane replied. She's always been a bit much. Always asking about the business, trying to get involved where she doesn't belong. This night is about family and Harold's real legacy. Aaron said he'd tell her there's limited seating, that she'd understand. I froze, knife hovering over the tomato I'd been slicing. Aaron hadn't told me anything. That evening, I casually asked to see the final guest list, claiming I wanted to make sure my cousins who were coming from out of town were properly included. Aaron hesitated, then pulled up the email on his phone. "Jennifer's handling all that," he said, reluctantly handing me the device. "I'm sure your cousins made the cut." I scrolled through the extensive list, my heart pounding as I confirmed what I'd overheard. Everyone was included, extended family I'd never even met, business associates from decades past, even Harold's golf buddies and their spouses. My name was conspicuously absent. So were my cousins, who hadn't actually been planning to attend. I'd fabricated that detail to see the list. Is there a mistake? I asked, keeping my voice steady as I handed back the phone. I don't see my name. Aaron took the phone back quickly, not meeting my eyes. Oh, there's limited seating. Dad wants to focus on people from his business life, you know? Old colleagues, industry people. I was going to tell you. I see. I smiled, though something cold and hard settled in my chest. And you agreed with this decision? It's Dad's night, he said defensively. I'm sure you understand. It's boring business stuff anyway. You'd be miserable. The following morning, after Aaron left for work, I drove to Harold's house. Harold answered the door in his robe, coffee in hand, surprised to see me on his doorstep at 8 a.m. Rachel, what brings you by so early? I'd like to understand why I'm not invited to your retirement party, I said without preamble. Harold had the grace to look uncomfortable, stepping back to let me enter the marble-floored foyer. It's nothing personal, just family and business associates. I'm not family? You know what I mean. Core family, the ones involved in the business. I stared at him for a long moment. Harold, who do you think paid for your retirement party? He blinked. The company, of course. It's a business expense.
No, I did. Personally.
The venue, the catering, the band, the custom photo retrospective being set up as we speak. All from my personal savings. Harold's face reddened. That's not possible. Aaron would have said something. Aaron doesn't know. None of them do. They think it all magically came together while they were busy taking credit for saving your company. His expression hardened. What exactly are you implying, Rachel? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Facts that apparently don't warrant an invitation. Harold squared his shoulders. I appreciate any contributions you may have made, but tomorrow night is about family tradition. The Lockwood name. I nodded slowly. I understand completely. After leaving Harold's house, I drove straight to my bank across town, the one where I'd maintained accounts since before my marriage. Inside the safe deposit box I'd opened years ago was a leather portfolio containing documents Harold had long forgotten, or assumed I had. The teller led me to the private room where I could examine the contents in privacy. With steady hands, I removed each document, laying them out methodically on the small table. The original investment agreement, signed and notarized, clearly stating that in exchange for the capital infusion that saved Lockwood Manufacturing, I would receive 52% ownership through my holding company, Phoenix Capital Partners, a name I'd chosen for its symbolism of rebirth from ashes. Corporate restructuring documents with my holding company listed as majority stakeholder, with contingencies that kept this arrangement confidential for 3 years unless certain conditions were triggered, such as attempts to exclude the majority owner from significant company events. Email trails documenting my strategic input over 3 years, carefully saved and printed, with Harold's responses acknowledging and implementing my recommendations. Your idea for the medical components division was brilliant, one email from Harold read. I presented it to the board exactly as you outlined, and they approved it unanimously. Banking records showing my personal funds flowing into company accounts through structured investments, not loans, as the family believed, but capital for equity. For 3 years, I'd been the silent partner, the shadow owner, the actual savior of Lockwood Manufacturing. Not for Harold's sake, not for Aaron's, but because I saw potential where they saw only a burden. The company had good bones, dedicated workers, and a solid reputation despite its financial troubles. It needed vision and capital, both of which I provided while the family was busy planning its funeral. I carefully photographed each document with my phone, then returned them to the portfolio and the safe deposit box. The originals would remain secure. The copies would serve my immediate purpose. That night, Aaron came home late and didn't notice me sitting in the dark home office, reviewing the digital copies of the documents. Work ran late, he said, kissing me distractedly on his way to pour a drink. Big client in town. Excited for your dad's party tomorrow? I asked, shutting my laptop. Yeah, should be great. Jennifer's been working hard on it. A lie, but a telling one. Listen, about you not going. It's fine, I interrupted. I understand it's for family. Relief flooded his face.
Exactly.
Thanks for understanding. I smiled. Just one thing. I left my blue blazer at your dad's office last week when I stopped by to drop off some tax forms. Would you mind if I swing by the party just to pick it up? I'll need it for work Monday. Sure, no problem, he said easily, already moving toward the stairs. Just maybe come toward the end? Around 10? When things are winding down. Of course, I agreed. I wouldn't want to intrude on the family celebration. Later, lying beside my sleeping husband, I contemplated the path ahead. I had never intended to use my majority ownership as a weapon. It had been a business decision, protection for my investment, and, if I was honest with myself, insurance against exactly the kind of dismissal I was now experiencing. The Lockwoods had always treated me as an accessory, useful when convenient, invisible when not. Tomorrow would change everything, not because I wanted revenge, but because respect had to be earned when it wasn't freely given. The Harwick Hotel ballroom looked exactly as I'd envisioned when I walked in at 8:30 p.m., not 10 o'clock as I'd promised Aaron. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with the blue and silver of Lockwood Manufacturing. The photo retrospective I'd commissioned lined the walls, telling the story of Harold's journey from ambitious young entrepreneur to industry veteran. The jazz quartet played softly in the corner, Harold's favorite Miles Davis composition filling the air. I wore a red dress I'd purchased months ago specifically for this occasion, classic, elegant, and impossible to miss in a sea of conservative blue and black attire. My hair was swept up, diamond studs, a gift to myself on my last birthday, catching the light. Heads turned as I entered. Some guests, suppliers, and clients who knew me from my consulting work nodded in greeting. Others, particularly family members who understood I wasn't supposed to be there, stared openly. Aaron spotted me from across the room, champagne flute frozen halfway to his lips. He excused himself from a conversation and hurried over. "Rachel, you're early," he hissed, gripping my elbow and steering me toward a quieter corner. "And what are you wearing? I thought you were just picking up your blazer." "Change of plans," I said pleasantly, extricating my arm from his grasp. "I decided to stay for the speeches. I hear your father has prepared something special." "But you can't. There's no place setting for you," he stammered, glancing nervously toward the head table where Harold sat with Diane, Jennifer, Michael, and their spouses. "I'm sure I'll manage," I replied, moving past him toward the stage where a microphone stood waiting. Harold had just been called up and was making his way to the podium amid enthusiastic applause. For 30 minutes, I stood quietly at the back of the room, listening as Harold recounted his journey building Lockwood Manufacturing. He thanked old colleagues, mentioned pivotal contracts, and acknowledged his children's invaluable support during challenging times. When he concluded to a standing ovation, the MC, a local business association president, announced it was time for dinner service. But before the servers could begin bringing out the appetizers, I moved quickly and purposefully toward the stage. As Harold stepped back from the microphone, I ascended the 3 small steps to the stage. The room quieted, confusion evident on many faces. Harold paused halfway back to his seat, caught off guard by my presence. "For those who don't know me," I began, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart, "I'm Rachel Lockwood, Aaron's wife." I wanted to add a small postscript to Harold's wonderful career retrospective. I saw Jennifer lean over to whisper something to Michael. Diane's hand flew to her throat in alarm. Aaron remained frozen near the back of the room, his expression a mixture of confusion and dread. 3 years ago, when Lockwood Manufacturing was facing bankruptcy, yes, bankruptcy, I continued as murmurs spread through the room, I made an investment. Not as a loan, but as a business partner. I opened the portfolio I carried and held up the first document, its official seals clearly visible even from a distance. This agreement, signed by Harold himself, grants me 52% ownership of Lockwood Manufacturing. That makes me not just family, though clearly that's debatable, but the majority owner of the company everyone is celebrating tonight. The room fell completely silent. 170 people seemed to collectively hold their breath. Aaron took a half step forward, then stopped, uncertainty rendering him immobile. The remarkable turnaround you've all witnessed wasn't luck or magic. It wasn't even primarily Harold's doing, though he has been an excellent frontman. I smiled at my father-in-law, who had gone pale. It was strategy, capital, and hard work, mine. The medical components division that saved the company. My concept, my research, my financing strategy. The party you're enjoying tonight? Also funded entirely by me, down to the engraved napkins with the Lockwood logo. I turned to face Harold directly. I never asked for recognition, just respect. But it seems in this family, those aren't compatible. Harold finally found his voice. Rachel, this is hardly the time or place. On the contrary, I interrupted gently. This is exactly the time and place. You've gathered everyone who matters in the Lockwood universe to mark a transition. I'm simply clarifying what that transition involves. I placed the microphone back in its stand and addressed the stunned crowd once more. Effective Monday morning, I'll be assuming direct control as CEO of Lockwood Manufacturing. I look forward to working with those of you who genuinely care about its future. For those who don't, well, the market for middle managers is quite competitive these days. As I walked off stage, the room erupted. Some guests immediately gathered their things to leave. Others huddled in shocked conversations. Harold remained rooted in place, looking suddenly much older than his 65 years. Aaron intercepted me near the door, grabbing my elbow. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Some kind of joke?" I removed his hand from my arm. "The documents are real, Aaron. Ask your father." "You can't do this. The company is our family legacy. It was nearly your family's bankruptcy." I corrected him. "Now it's my company." His face twisted with anger and something else. Fear, perhaps. "We're married. What's yours is mine." I smiled sadly. "You might want to consult the prenuptial agreement you insisted on. Specifically, the clause about separate business interests." I walked out into the cool evening air, feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone was already buzzing with messages, board members, clients, employees. The story was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. By morning, everyone would know that Lockwood Manufacturing had a new leader. The story of what happened at Harold Lockwood's retirement party spread through the business community like wildfire. By Sunday afternoon, I had received calls from 2 local business reporters seeking confirmation. By Monday morning, when I walked into the headquarters and took my seat in the CEO's office, Harold's old office, everyone from the receptionist to the senior managers knew who I was. I spent that first day meeting with department heads, reviewing operations, and assuring nervous employees that their jobs were secure, more secure, in fact, than they had been in years. I outlined my vision for expanding the medical components division and exploring new markets in renewable energy manufacturing, areas I had researched extensively, but Harold had been hesitant to pursue. Aaron didn't come home that night, or the next. On the 3rd day, he arrived with boxes to collect his things. "You humiliated my entire family," he said as he packed, yanking clothes from hangers with enough force to break several. "Was that your plan all along? To infiltrate and take over?" "My plan was to save a company I believed in," I replied, watching him from the doorway. The humiliation was entirely self-inflicted. "Dad trusted you." "No," I corrected. "He underestimated me." "So did you." Aaron paused, a framed photo of our wedding day in his hands. 3 years, he said, more to himself than to me. 3 years of sneaking around, making secret plans. 3 years of working nights and weekends to save your family's legacy while you bought sports cars and took credit for work you didn't do, I countered. 3 years of being treated as an accessory rather than a partner. He set the photo down, not meeting my eyes. "What happens now?" "Now I run the company I own. You decide what role, if any, you want in it and in my life." He laughed bitterly. "You think I'd work for you? Or stay married to someone who did this?" I shrugged. "That's your choice, Aaron. But remember, I'm not the one who excluded my spouse from a family celebration. I'm not the one who lied about the company's situation. I'm just the one who finally stopped accepting disrespect." After Aaron left, taking up residence in his parents' pool house according to mutual friends, I fully expected a legal challenge from the family. It never came. Harold, it seemed, remembered enough about the documents he'd signed to know they were ironclad. Instead, he announced his complete retirement from any advisory role and moved with Diane to their vacation home in Florida. Jennifer and Michael presented more complicated challenges. As employees of the company, and competent ones, despite their flaws, firing them outright would have been wasteful. Both were well-connected in the industry and had relationships with clients that would be difficult to replace overnight. Your positions are secure, I told them in my first meeting as CEO. Your attitudes need adjustment. Jennifer, ever the pragmatist, adapted quickest. Within weeks, she was bringing me proposals for expanding her department, addressing me as Rachel, rather than the dismissive Aaron's wife she'd used for years. Michael took longer, his wounded pride manifesting in passive-aggressive comments and missed deadlines. After a month, I moved him to a newly created role overseeing community relations, a position that utilized his social skills without giving him authority over critical operations. Over the following months, Lockwood Manufacturing continued its upward trajectory. I stepped fully into the spotlight I'd avoided for years, implementing innovations I'd previously had to suggest through Harold. Under my leadership, the company secured 3 major medical device contracts, expanded its workforce by 15%, and broke ground on a new research and development facility. Industry publications began running profiles on the secret architect behind the company's renaissance. A prominent business magazine included me in their Women to Watch in Manufacturing feature. Competitors made discreet inquiries about acquisition possibilities, which I politely but firmly declined. 6 months after the party, Harold called me. I should have recognized what you were doing, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. All those suggestions, the meetings, the questions about operations. I thought you were just being nosy. Yes, I agreed. You should have. The kids are still angry. That's their choice. A long pause followed. For what it's worth, I'm not. Angry, that is. The company's doing better than I ever managed. That's because you built something worth saving, Harold. I just refuse to let it die. After we hung up, I walked to the large windows of my office, the office that had once been his, and looked out at the manufacturing floor below. Workers moved efficiently between stations. The machinery hummed. Orders were being filled. In the administrative section, I could see Jennifer conducting a meeting, gesturing animatedly at a presentation on the wall screen. Aaron and I had filed for divorce the previous month. The proceedings were amicable, if not friendly. His lawyer quickly realized the prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on now worked significantly in my favor. He had already accepted a position with a competitor in another state, eager to escape the shadow of what people now called the Lockwood coup. This was never about revenge. It was about recognition, not just for me, but for what happens when you underestimate someone because they don't fit your image of success. The Lockwoods had seen me as an accessory to their family, useful, but ultimately disposable. They never considered that I might be the author of their future. And now, in a twist none of us had expected, I was.